Officer, I'd like to cast off it slightly behind time. So first of all, welcome to the second international conference by CIPR, and of course, we're looking at the overall theme of alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, and we do have a stellar lineup with us. And before we start and I introduce the panelists, I just thought a few opening remarks on ASEAN for that sake, and I'd like to start off with ASEAN centrality. Is that first of all, there's a lot of questions on what you mean by centrality, even by ASEAN nations themselves, and that's something that we have been grappling it with some time. But nonetheless, the other issue is the cohesiveness of ASEAN as an organization, and the backdrop I can give you is the code of conduct and the inability to come up with firm statements in the past and also to formulate a code of conduct. So, a divided house, maybe so, but yet there is also a collective voice that says, do not ask us to choose sides, which makes difficult approaches towards cooperative mechanisms and engagements on certain security related issues, since they have the choice between maybe the US allies and its strategic partners in China. But nonetheless, the ASEAN does provide engagement platforms. It engages with various nations as dialogue partners, as sectoral dialogue partners, and development partners, and the a plethora of platforms: ADMM Plus, ARF, EAMF, and ASEAN Plus 3, and the East Asia Summit. And today we are looking at US ASEAN relations, 46 years to the date this year, and that's a long time. And we will look at how the US engages with ASEAN nations independently. A little word, if you could give it that, since we are having sort of people from 4 different locations in the globe, and of course, ASEAN as an entity. And how do you see the ASEAN partnership going forward over, if I could ask you to cover 3 main things. One is security related aspects, one is the economic related aspects, and of course, how to balance the approach to a free and open Indo-Pacific that requires a sort of a rules-based order to move quite ahead. And with that, I'd like to introduce the speakers. Just a short, we have Professor Cogan, who is from the Kansai Gaidai University in Osaka. I hope I got that correct. And your research interests are Southeast Asia, broader Indo-Pacific region, security studies, peace building, and quite a lot of other related issues. Then we have Colonel Hollman, who's the chief of the Mission Assurance Division with the INDOPACOM, and I'm sure he must having a full desk full of files and other work which he would have sacrificed time to be on board today. And we have Mr. José Custodio from the Philippines. You have been the consultant in the Office of National Security Advisor and Office of President of the Philippines. And with the US-Philippines relationships improving day by day after a bit of a hiatus in between, I think that's an interesting aspect, if you could throw some light on that. And of course, we have last is Dr. Yao from the National Defense University in Taiwan. You look at intermingled relations between national security policy, international relations, and technology. This is indeed a stellar lineup. And since we are having, can you hear me still? All right, thank you. And so if I could ask Professor Cogan to start the batting innings. We're into cricket season in India, so do excuse my interjection of cricketing terms. We seem to have won all matches so far. And over to you,
let's
Professor
use baseball
Cogan.
references, okay?
All right. 10 minutes, please. I'll give you a reminder at 9 minutes so that we can.
All right. That sounds good. I thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak. I thank Dr. Indu for selecting for the panel. When I was invited, I wasn't sure what the topic was, obviously Indo-Pacific, but I think she knows me better than I thought, because the chance to talk about the U.S. ASEAN partnership is right up my alley. I am by nature a Southeast Asia specialist, and I write a lot about, well, ASEAN, both individual members and, of course, the body or the institution itself. So rather than talk about the formal partnership, which I think is in its sort of nascent form, I would like to talk about individual bilateral relations with certain states, and then also, to a degree, inconsistency, I believe, in U.S. foreign policy. Now, you can't have foreign policy congruence between ideologically different administrations, but the scale of the difference between the two, the Trump and the Biden administration, has been problematic. We've gone from a transactional type diplomacy, particularly in the case of Thailand, to I don't really have a term for it. It's more of a quiet, almost completely inconsistent approach to Southeast Asia as a whole. And I'll give some examples about this. So let me start by talking about some of these foreign policy missteps. First, Biden, I believe, or the Biden administration, or the U.S., whatever you want to call it, has made some strategic mistakes, particularly with regard to ASEAN as an institution. So it was not long ago that Biden decided to attend the G20 in India, passed up on the ASEAN summit, which was held in Jakarta, and then made a special trip to Hanoi to promote this strategic partnership with Vietnam. Instead, he sends Vice President Harris, although she is quite accomplished as a politician in California. Her foreign policy expertise, I think, with regard to Southeast Asia, except for a couple of speeches in Singapore and in Vietnam, is a bit lacking. So for the United States, in terms of how Southeast Asia viewed that skippage, the optics were terrible, right? It's like, you're the runner-up or third place in this sort of trio of meetings. And it says something very, very inconsistent about wanting to build a stronger relationship with ASEAN as it's an institution, because it seems to play second fiddle, so to speak, to the other minilateral institutions, or to even second to Vietnam. So that many of you will talk about this, an existential crisis, right? That even privately, Indonesian, Singaporean, Thai diplomats have suggested that at the meeting, the relevance of the body itself is at stake because of the inability of individual member states who are trapped into two different camps: the pro-engagement camp, and then the camp that wants to hold the line on not necessarily isolation, but hold the line on implementation, if you can, of the 5-point consensus, right? That is a huge problem. So U.S. presence at the ASEAN summit would have sent a signal to ASEAN their differences. And Biden's absence also sends additional signals and a kind of, really it was a missed opportunity, because Chinese President Xi Jinping was already absent, and he was replaced by their premier instead. And that missed a critical opportunity to reassert American influence over this very, very troubled body. And I think that that mismeeting is a kind of microcosm for U.S. foreign policy in Southeast Asia. Biden's absenteeism was not necessarily just limited to the ASEAN summit. And it's a problem when ASEAN member states are really trying to balance their relationships, both with China and the United States, amid regional turmoil, both in Myanmar, in the South China Sea, and then economically through the Belt and Road Initiative, and which is often less talked about, water rights along the Mekong River Delta and the Mekong River. So it spills over, this absenteeism. He was absent from the APEC summit in Thailand in 2022. And again, Harris filled in. The Thais, even under Prayut, actually publicly said that that was a snub. It was an insult to a critically important meeting where Thailand was not only struggling economically, but was really looking for the spotlight to be on them. For example, the whole theme of APEC at that time was open, connect, and balance, right? That sounds, rhetorically empty, but the real issue for Thailand was open your borders, encourage cross-border travel, and encourage post-COVID economic recovery for tourism vulnerable countries, right? The only thing that Thailand got out of that was some assurances from Putin through side channel diplomacy that he would send Russian planes to Thailand. That's not the outcome that Thailand was expecting. That was not the outcome that they were expecting. So this absenteeism, I think, is a problem, because also it suggests that the United States isn't capable of multitasking, of balancing crises on multiple fronts, where you can stay focused geopolitically on the war in Ukraine, where you can stay focused on what at the time was, Chinese economic coercion, and have a hand in, or being proactive in, trying to come to a political solution in Myanmar. U.S. presence would have been extremely valuable. And I think to a certain extent, it let countries that either were sitting on the fence or were pro-engagement. And then I'm talking about Laos, I'm talking about Cambodia, right? And a few others, that the U.S. presence simply buys the junta more time, and that the Americans are not willing to up the ante with regard to sanctions, sanctions that were supposed to be effective under the Burma Act, which is underfunded and risks in 2024 to be somewhat underfunded, and that it needs to do more than simply target state-owned banks. And it needs to be critical in putting pressure, U.S. pressure, and halting what is called the death trade, which is something that the UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar, Tom Andrews, called, which basically revealed that for a certain period of time, dating back to probably like 2018, as much as $1 billion in arms and raw military materials came from ASEAN countries. Singapore, Thailand, and of course, China, who is a member of the ASEAN +3. So this existential crisis that ASEAN is dealing with, particularly in the South China Sea, luckily is being dealt with by figures within ASEAN. I think the Philippines' response to Chinese patrols or Chinese incursions is probably the correct one. But Biden's absence, right, signals to a certain extent that the Americans are hands off in this approach, and it represents a kind of departure from this old school kind of quiet diplomacy where, you know, the United States and attempted to caution ASEAN member states and even China against aggression or aggressive retaliation policies. So I don't know how much time I have left, but I want to make another point about ideology and U.S. foreign policy with regard to not just ASEAN, but the Indo-Pacific as well. And this is probably has a global application. It's that the United States is not seen as a credible partner. Just like in some senses, China is not seen as a credible partner that has a growing nasty reputation. But for the United States, maybe it's a bit more mild. But the case in point I'm making here is the Democracy Summit. These several democracy summits that were held dating back to 2021. And the criteria was supposed to be, you are inviting emerging democracies. Perhaps to a certain extent, you're inviting them based on their potential, right? But instead, I think the invitations were selected based on American political interests or national interests. And it reeked of hypocrisy to critics, where you could invite Rodrigo Duterte, obviously democratically elected and very popular in the Philippines at the time, but being accused of extrajudicial killings, the war on drugs, that is, the optics are bad there. On the other hand, though, you had fair representation. You had the Indonesian president in attendance, and then you also had Japanese Prime Minister Kishida in attendance. But other ASEAN partners, like Thailand, which was not a democracy, let's face it, it's an authoritarian state. But a better approach would be for the United States to have stepped back, because it's not a credible partner in the eyes of certain states, particularly with regard to democracy promotion, because a lot of U.S. democracy promotion has been an abysmal failure. It's true. On the broad scale, yes. On the small scale, maybe not. But it would have been an opportunity for America to let its regional partners do the work, show that democracy can flourish in Asia, in Southeast Asia, by highlighting democratic successes, right? Democratic advancements. Indonesia could have been an example. Japan, South Korea, right? Emerging democracies. India, although it has some problems, of course, you know, it depends on who you ask, but let people with better reputations, more credibility in the region will take the lead in this Democracy Summit, because the end result, meaning the optics, how it's seen, how it's viewed by ASEAN member states who were either invited or snubbed, right? It's just problematic. Thailand should not have been snubbed. It should have been invited. And the United States should have leveraged Japan's strong relationship and diplomatic track record with Thailand that dates back to the early 1960s, right? The growing relationship between Thailand and South Korea, not only the growing economic partnership, but a cultural exchange, right? Moving beyond, not just democracy promotion, but value promotion, right? Soft power exchange to a certain extent. So this shouldn't have been a list of actors that were screened based on U.S. national interests, but an invitation to countries, a free invitation to countries from anywhere to understand the benefits and not just learn from the United States, but learn from regional partners, right, who have experience in certain aspects of democratization. So that's really,
Dr. Cogan.
yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I was out of the loop. So if you could just kindly wrap up. I'm now on the phone. My laptop is playing through, and thank you so much. But if you could just wrap up, please.
All right. So I think you get my point. That the problem with the United States has been, to sum things up, is policy inconsistency. That dates back from the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, and its inability to multitask and its inability to manage crises and use credible partners has been detrimental to its own relationship, not just to ASEAN as an institution, but individual ASEAN member states. All right, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cogan, and my apologies to all people online, but I think I'll stick to my phone right now because the laptop is giving some problem. Colonel Hollman, could we have your views, please?
Hi, good morning, and can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right. Hey, thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's panel on U.S. ASEAN partnership, a partnership built on the premise of a free and open Indo-Pacific. So on an administrative note, although I'm a member of the U.S. Department of Defense, my comments do not reflect the views of my department or official U.S. policy, and all my comments are derived from unclassified sources. I appreciate Dr. Cogan's comments on the U.S. ASEAN relationship and some of the inconsistencies, that we see in that relationship. I think it kind of points to a checklist mentality, that the U.S. government might be taking towards covering all bases, if you will. There's certainly a lot going on out there in the geopolitical realm, and you certainly have to pick your attendance carefully. You can't be everywhere at once. And that all goes back to his advisors and members of his administration that are telling him where he needs to be at what time. But what I've prepared today, and where I think the best place to start, is with the White House readout on the September summit, which was attended by Vice President Kamala Harris, as mentioned. And within the first paragraph of the fact sheet that the White House released, it notes that the U.S. has an enduring commitment to Southeast Asia and ASEAN centrality. And then goes on to boast about the administration's FY24 budget request for an unprecedented $1.2 billion in economic development and security assistance for the nations of Southeast Asia, in addition to $90 million dedicated solely to the engagement with ASEAN and efforts to strengthen ASEAN institutions. So I think that says something. It's kind of putting your money where your mouth is. And certainly when you release a White House fact sheet, you kind of put it on record that these are commitments that you are making to the organization and to the relationship. Certainly that's assuming that those funds are approved in those amounts ultimately and dispersed for that purpose when the budget finally shakes out. On top of this financial commitment, the White House went on to espouse support for ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which kind of takes centrality to the next level by encouraging extra regional coordination across the Indo-Pacific with such forums as the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multisectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, or BIMSTEC, just to name two. So my initial thought on that is, how can ASEAN bring together other regional entities if it can't bring together its own members? And Dr. Cogan made some comments about this earlier, about the relevance of the organization. You have not only inter-ASEAN, issues to discuss, but you also have bilateral issues, which oftentimes eclipse the greater organization. Case in point, the organization's failure in 2012 to produce the customary communique at the end of its annual gathering of foreign ministers, the first such failure since its inception in 1967. And the issue, as we all know, was Cambodia's refusal to include Philippine and Vietnamese positions on their disputes with China over the South China Sea. And as we're all aware, those disputes are still brewing at the Second Thomas Shoal, where Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese fishing boats routinely physically interfere with Philippine resupply missions. And then you have the U.S. reminding the world that it will defend the Philippines in accordance with our 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, a treaty which was recently updated to specifically cover any armed attack on either country anywhere in the South China Sea. So that is certainly fraught with danger, and I think the Philippines are emboldened by that backing. Certainly you have to, understand that an attack is going to be interpreted differently by different parties. You could say that, the PRC's Coast Guard ramming a Philippine patrol boat is an attack of some sort. But I think until bullets are flying, we probably won't breach that particular red line. If we could get back to the White House press release, another significant outcome from the September summit was the announcement that the U.S. and ASEAN will upgrade its relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership and establish a U.S. ASEAN Center in Washington, D.C. This center will be launched via a public-private partnership between the Department of State and Arizona State University. In the years to come, the United States and ASEAN will continue working together to institutionalize and expand cooperation in order to promote ASEAN as an epicenter of growth, an advanced free and open region that is increasingly connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. The press release goes on to describe dozens of initiatives and investments in trade, infrastructure, transportation, technology, climate, defense, health and education, and sustainability. So that's the brief readout of the September summit from the U.S. perspective. Underpinning the comprehensive strategic partnership is our strong bilateral relationships with each of the individual member nations. And I say strong, obviously some of those relationships are stronger than others. And I think if you ask the senior leaders of each of those countries if they support the concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific, I think they'd tell you, yes, of course. And why wouldn't they? Because what's the alternative? An occupied and closed Indo-Pacific, dominated by great powers who coerce and bully their less powerful neighbors. And that's really why ASEAN was founded in the first place. And I went back to ASEAN's website and pulled a quote from the website, citing Tun Abdul Razak, who was then Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia back in 1967. And it said he stressed that the countries of the region should recognize that unless they assumed their common responsibility to shape their own destiny and to prevent external intervention and interference, Southeast Asia would remain fraught with danger and tension. And unless they took decisive and collective action to prevent the eruption of intra-regional conflicts, the nations of Southeast Asia would remain susceptible to manipulation one against the other. So those words uttered in 1967 speak to a reality that ASEAN has yet to realize. Southeast Asian nations remain embroiled in great power competition. Their leaders susceptible to external pressures and coercion. Perhaps one day ASEAN will achieve its vision and fulfill its destiny. I believe only time will tell. Real quick, of course, the U.S. isn't the only nation to maintain a strategic, comprehensive partnership with ASEAN. China does as well. In addition, China is one of 54 high contracting parties to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which embodies universal principles of peaceful coexistence and friendly cooperation among states in Southeast Asia. According to ASEAN's website, the treaty is a legally binding code for interstate relations in the region and beyond. China and ASEAN recently reiterated their comments to the treaty.
Colonel Hollman, I'm sorry I'm intruding again, but we need to do a reassessment of time. My due apologies to all panelists. My connectivity went for a toss. Could I ask you to kindly wind up so we can have some question and answer sessions and some more perspectives from all the speakers? So if you could just wrap up in a minute. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So interestingly, that statement served to reaffirm the commitment to fully and effectively implement the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea in its entirety and work towards the early conclusion of an effective and substantive code of conduct in the South China Sea in accordance with international law. So it would seem that that renewed commitment is a bit at odds with China's bullying behavior in the South China Sea. And apparently treaties and partnerships have their limits when China's extraterritorial claims are up for debate. Perhaps ASEAN should propose a no-limits partnership with China in this regard. So again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to participate today, and I look forward to hearing the other panelists' views and taking any questions from the online audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Hollman. I would have to restrict 7 minutes per speaker, so there's a drink due on me whenever we meet next. Mr. Custodio, your views, please.
Please unmute yourself. Jose, unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm muted. That takes already 30 seconds of my time. Anyway, so I'm going to discuss about the revitalizing relations of the Philippines with its partners and the United States. Okay, we all are familiar with the locust years of Duterte, the years of Duterte, which that president enabled the Chinese and saw bilateral cooperation with the U.S. greatly reduced. Okay, not now with the new Marcos administration, who is the son of the former dictator. we see normalized relations with the United States, and it appears that the Philippines is making up for lost time, because 6 years was indeed so much time lost. He is actually doing what should have been done 6 years ago, the new president. So earlier this year, the enhanced defense cooperation agreement. With regards to that, there were sites that American military could operate from were increased from initial 5 sites at various places in the Philippines. They added additional 4 sites. Okay, and much of these sites, although these sites are declared to have a humanitarian assistance requirement, which is of course valid given the fact that the Philippines is prone to a series of natural disasters on an annual basis. It also allows the U.S. to stage off from areas near Taiwan and the South China Sea, enabling them to neutralize any hostile operation in either places. From, of course, we all know who that hostile power would be. Now, there have been more exercises and bilateral and multilateral activities with either the U.S. or Philippines side in the lead or as co-host. Other countries such as Japan and Australia take part in these activities. Very important is the increasing Japanese presence in activities in Southeast Asia. The exercises usually gravitate between military operations in conflict scenarios to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Now, early this year alone, we had the largest bilateral exercise with the United States, which was known as Balikatan. Okay, it's an annual exercise, but early this year it involved 17,000 troops, and there were a number of very significant activities in that particular exercises, and there are a lot of other exercises that took place. And this is in direct contrast to the previous administration, when there was an effort to minimize exercises by the Philippine military with its United States counterparts, precisely because of the fact that the president was accommodating Chinese influence. So most of the exercises now would be of various services, like there would be air exercises, naval exercises, and like I said, it would gravitate between humanitarian assistance and military operations in a conflict scenario. But there was also another exercise that was interesting, which was the Philippines seems to be inching closer towards what would be known as joint patrol. So we had exercises with the U.S. Navy, for example, known as bilateral sail, which was done just a few months ago. Okay, where both warships of both countries would conduct exercises in the western side of the Philippines, in the western seas. Okay, now at the same time, we again, also to emphasize Japan's increasing role in the Philippines, is that there was a trilateral exercise between coast guards of U.S., Japan, and the Philippines in the middle of this year alone. And they, interestingly, again, they were exercising on the western side of the Philippines, off the coast of Bataan, executing simulated search and rescue scenarios, maritime law enforcement boardings, passing exercises, and formation maneuvering drills. Very important in the sense that the Philippines will have to is actually engaging Chinese maritime ships, and in that situation, it is very important for the Philippines to train with countries like, of course, the Japanese, which also goes toe to toe with Chinese maritime ships in their side of the world. Now, many of the activities, as I said, between the Philippines and its partners and allies are now on the western side of the archipelago, and obviously aim to send strong messages to China. One such activity, which was done during Balikatan, was the use of HIMARS, a very famous weapon in the Ukraine war. It was showcased here in the Philippines, and another one was the sinking of a target ship, Sinkex, at the West Philippine Sea, which is the Philippine renamed part of the South China Sea. Now, as for ASEAN, there was ASEAN, again, I will not anymore repeat what was said about ASEAN's problems, but there was an ASEAN multilateral military exercise held last September, which again had a humanitarian theme. Although, according to the ASEAN, there may be a possible military-based teams in the future, but that remains to be seen. Okay. Now, naturally, increased activity to the U.S. and its allies has led to a corresponding increase in friction between the Philippines and China. Use of lasers and other forms of harassments have been documented even during the time of Duterte. But what is different now is that the Philippine government is more vocal about it, leading to strong words being exchanged between Manila and Beijing. So before, the Philippine government tended to suppress any information if it had encounters with the Chinese. Now it's all being reported. And also in an effort to reduce the influence of pro-Chinese elements in the Philippines, because like I said, because of the Duterte administration, Chinese influence increased. The Philippine Coast Guard spokesman came out in public accusing them of being traitors. So previously, the Philippine government only had to contend with the usual suspects when it came to anti-US protests in the country. But this time, they have to deal with elements from the Duterte camp, pro-China groups, and the like. Okay, so their influence and their capabilities have increased. So it has to be it increased the level of threat from being a mere irritant during the time of just this left-wing activist to something that can affect policy if not unchecked. We have to remember that the vice president of the Philippines is the daughter of Duterte. Now, still actions like that of calling them out as traitors put the pro-China elements in the Philippines on the defensive, and it reflects a political drama being played out in the Philippines between the Duterte and Marcos camps. Because, like I said, the Marcos vice president is, after all, the daughter of the former president, and there appears to be, as I said, a falling out between the two camps. So, again, to make the Philippines a more capable partner in this situation in the South China Sea and with its regional partners and allies, the Philippines is modernizing its forces. Okay, the Philippines is, however, a late entry into the missile age when it comes to other types of systems, aside from short-range air-to-air missiles that it once used from the 1960s to the 1990s. The past few years has seen the Philippine military receive missiles for its air and naval assets, while the delivery of a purchase of several batteries of BrahMos supersonic missiles from India is expected at the end of the year at the earliest. The Philippine Air Force, being one of the oldest in Southeast Asia, having been established in the 1930s, still has no dedicated MRF up to this, or multi-role fighter up to this very moment. And the discussions of it swings from acquiring Gripen from Sweden or the costlier F-16 from the US, or to acquire more F-A-50 light fighters from the South Koreans. As of today, South Korea is Manila's top defense supplier when it comes to acquiring the major assets of the Philippine military, from combat aircraft to warships. The US, on the other hand, appears for the moment to provide the transition assets that allow the Philippines to maintain a very modest capability to defend itself while it builds up further its military, which will still take a number of years and a good amount of financial resources. Because you see, money is always a problem for the Philippines. Now, Japan plays a major role in equipping the maritime agencies of the Philippines, having provided 10 44-meter ships under ODA packages to the Philippine Coast Guard, further boosting its capabilities. It may supply military systems in the future to the Philippines from excess stocks of the JSDF. And finally, what are the challenges? So everything looks good now, but what's the challenges? Well, challenges is political change. In 2028, we will have in 2025, there will be midterm elections. And if the numbers of senators increase in the Philippine Senate who are pro-China, then that can affect foreign policy decisions. Then at the same time, in 2028, we have a presidential election. And if the vice president wins that election, then it might be a repeat again of the what we had during the Duterte administration, which is increasing again China influence and dithering attitudes of the Philippines. And then, of course, another challenge, of course, is the Philippine economy. The Philippine economy stays strong, then modernization.
Mr. Custodio, interrupting
and
again.
That's it.
Could you just kindly wrap up, please?
Done.
Thank you so much.
I'm
Thank
done
you.
already. I'm done already.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very
You nailed
much.
it with the last dollar.
Yes.
Right. Dr. Yao, your comments, please.
Okay, thank you, Captain Parmar. I think I will shorten my comments because I was given a topic talk about the U.S. ASEAN partnership. So I think, I'll talk about separate into three segments. First one, talk about, the U.S. interest in the region. And second, I move on to talk about China. Nobody talk about China in this panel, so it'd be good to mention China. And then third, probably I won't repeat too much because given a lot of people talking about ASEAN, what ASEAN's attitude. So I guess the first one is talking about the U.S. And we all know that U.S. proposed the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy in 2017. Very often we perceive it that U.S. has not limited itself upon the past diplomacy-driven and economy-centered approaches, but now even to more defense and security partnership focus. So right now we have Quad, among U.S., Japan, Australia, and India, and we have AUKUS, Australia, UK, and US. And I think we all know that even some regional actors, they are enhancing their defense investment, in particular Philippines. And Australia also have some kind of the reciprocal assessment agreement with Japan. And Australia also has the strategic partnership agreement with Philippines. And earlier, I think Colonel Hon-min mentioned about enhanced defense agreement between to use more bases in Philippines by US, and they are also GISMIA, so it's the General Security of Military and Information Agreement between Korea and Japan. And I think earlier Dr. Cogan mentioned about Joe Biden was not in ASEAN summit, and he was actually in Vietnam. A lot of people are saying that maybe the US was focusing more on the bilateral relationship over than looking for a multilateral framework. So this is probably, I'll say. So why this is interesting? I mean, the region for the global trade goes through this region, and 60% of the maritime trade goes through this region as well. 30% of the crude oil. So it's very important for US to secure the safety of the sea line of communication. So I think this is the first part. I think for US, ASEAN is a very important region, but we need to be careful. Are we talking about ASEAN as an institution or ASEAN countries? Now, the second one, we often forget to talk about China, given that it's the elephant in the room, right? Free and open Indo-Pacific, that's a Western invention. So what's the Chinese view to the region? Well, from the Chinese literature, there's something similar to this concept, and it's called Two Ocean Strategy. China was afraid that for the Pacific Ocean, because of the containment from the first island chain, second island chain, is major outlet to the world. So they needed to develop some kind of strategy connected to Indian Ocean. And that's what they mean by two ocean strategy. So this strategy is not just strategic, but it's also economic. Given that we all know that 80% of China's energy goes through Malacca Strait, and we heard about the Malacca dilemma. So past few years, China investing its Belt and Road Initiative, and we all know the String of Pearls strategy, is poured in Djibouti. And if you pay attention, you probably know there's a collaboration between China and Myanmar. So in a place called Kuopio, China built the oil pipeline by connecting the land bridge to the Indian Ocean in order to circumvent the potential bottleneck around the Malacca Strait, and also go through most of the ASEAN countries. So it also has the naval base in Rem, Cambodia. So this would allow China to deploy naval forces in case of any potential emergency or sanction around the South China Sea. Certainly for China, this area is also very important. Now I know my time is short. I want to save some time for Q&A. For ASEAN, earlier Dr. Cogan mentioned about the strategy of stand on the fence or ASEAN centrality. Some people will even call it strategic pendulum. Whatever you call it, basically this mentality is reflected by Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. He talked about don't force a regional country to pick a side because it's really, really difficult, given that they rely on China about the economy and they want security from the US. But with all of this, obviously the recent dispute with Philippines and also before the ASEAN summit, the map, and a lot of things, in particular, the inter-ASEAN disagreement that inhibit ASEAN's ability to offer any of constructive and productive agreement. So reality, I would say, is it's hard to tell, what's going to happen, but we need to be aware. Dr. Cogan, I think just yesterday, a couple of hours ago, U.S. and China made agreement that she is going to meet Joe Biden in San Francisco. Maybe that will be additional information we need to follow. Anyway, that's my view regarding three components: U.S., China, and ASEAN. And that's all. Back to you, Captain Parmar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yao. That gives us some time for Q&A and lovely views, points, frank and candid. And I think we got a lot of food for thought. So I have a query for all four of you, and I just want a very quick answer to this. So Professor Cogan initially talked about gaps and absenteeism and all that. And if you look at, remember the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy of 2022, which was from the Biden administration, it looked at 10 core lines of effort, and most of them looked at strengthening and empowering a unified ASEAN. But the discussions which we've seen sort of question that empowered and a unified ASEAN. So the question is that if the US is stretched and looking at Ukraine and South China Sea, and now we have the focus shifted to West Asia, and if we say that the free and open Indo-Pacific is based on the strength of the US alliances and strategic partnership, rules-based order. And there's a recent article by Robert Gates upon the US as a dysfunctional superpower. So how much do you think the US would be able to reinforce the idea of a rules-based order and therefore a free and open Indo-Pacific, especially with respect to ASEAN? And if I can start from the top again, if Professor Cogan, your views, and then we'll go down the same line. Quick answers, and then we'll open up for more Q&A.
Let me try to be brief. Very good question. I think with regard to the free and open Indo-Pacific concept, the United States has to show it is an engaged partner. And a microcosm of this is the struggle of ASEAN states to manage their own crises, their own and economic concerns, their need for interconnectivity, their need for secure supply chains, logistics, things like that. The recent development in Thailand, where the Thai government approved what they called a land bridge that bridges the two oceans, the Indian and the Pacific, across the southern provinces, a compromise deal with the sort of age-old Craw Canal idea, where you basically move massive amounts of earth to create a kind of Panama Canal in Southeast Asia. The problem is that a lot of these countries, when they want these infrastructure projects to be done and reap these economic benefits, they are stuck in the same position. That Sarabjeet Tavasin, the new prime minister, he pitched the idea to China. They know that that's the only one that has enough cash to fund it, but it is going to be a disaster because the plan is very poorly thought out. the Preute government abandoned the idea because, and many administrations in the past abandoned the idea because the Chinese investors that were recruited by former military generals or even by Thaksin Shinawatra and others were corrupt as hell, right? Or the project was so financially mismanaged, there was no way to view the infrastructure project as even remotely profitable. The new one, this land bridge, for example, doesn't even have oil and gas pipelines as a part of the exploration deal, right? Now I know that's a temporary thing because the demand for oil and gas is probably going to go down, but it speaks to the same problem, right? You want this free and open Indo-Pacific region with safe passage and secure shipping and fewer supply chain disruption and strengthening and cost reduction or reducing transaction costs for emerging economies, right? The United States is absent from these discussions. They're absent. And the Chinese are the only ones at the table. And it speaks volumes when Retd, who is going literally anywhere, to the Saudis, to the Chinese, elsewhere, for economic investment, foreign direct investment, even going to Putin
Professor
for
Cogan,
a deal. Yeah,
Professor
so
Cogan,
We can
wrap this up.
sincere
Let me wrap this up.
apologies. And then
Yeah.
just I want to conclude it here. So I just on this note that please, what US should do better in one sentence, if everyone every panelist can conclude this on this, what US
needs to,
should do better. Yeah, starting with you.
in one sentence, the United States needs to be remain engaged and present itself as a reasonable alternative investment partner to emerging economies that want to reap the benefits of this free and open Indo-Pacific concept.
Thank you, sir. Colonel Hollman,
Yeah.
please, what US should do more there?
Yeah, I think ASEAN, if it's going to remain relevant, well, if it's going to increase its relevancy, if ASEAN centrality is ultimately ever going to mean anything, the member nations are going to have to put aside, some of their individual interests and needs for the greater good. And, that they've, of course, got to sell their constituencies and their people on that strategy. But if they're going to harness the collective, power that's, resident in those economies and with those governments, that's what they need to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Yao, the same question.
Okay, thank you. I think what's happening is right now, free and open Indo-Pacific probably is referring to something similar, liberal international order. And that will be focusing on settle any dispute, but without use of the force. So we need to be recognized that small actors, certainly not just Taiwan, many other actors in ASEAN country, their best interest is to have some kind of global norm, international norm, to settle any kind of potential dispute with great power. And I think US need to do a better job to communicate the message to the regional partner. Let them understand the free and Indo-Pacific is not for the purpose of the great power competition, but actually for the safety, security, and stability for the smaller international actors. So that's all from me. Back to you, Dr. Indu.
Thank you, Jose. Jose, please go ahead. Thank you, Dr. Yao. Jose, you want to comment on this? Okay, so thank you so much, and our sincere apologies to everyone, because that was the U.S. ASEAN, and we had just 1 hour for that panel, and we are concluding it here. And I would like to invite the co-chair of this conference, Chris Kolowski, for his short, brief remarks here. Chris, over to you, please.
Thank you, Indu. I guess I get the last word, and I will simply say this is some great perspective. And this panels and discussions and perspective like this is why we do what we do and why we do these conferences. And I would encourage everybody to not just engage with the conference, but I'd love to see some of this as blog posts or some other publications for the consortium, because there's a lot here and we need to continue the conversation in other fora as well. I really appreciate the expertise today. And it's wonderful to see this is serious engagement with serious topics. And I appreciate everybody's perspective. And so, Indu, I know we're with one eye on the clock. I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you. And Colonel Hollman, especially thank you to you, because it was a very early morning that Hawaii is at 3 a.m. I can understand that. And Professor Cogan, that it's too late for you. And because we want this Indo-Pacific concept to discuss with the regional experts, that's why that whole scenario that we started preparing this this conference, and we were struggling to coordinate with from Australia to the Philippines to Japan. So again, we will invite you again for this for the panel U.S. ASEAN, because we have to discuss a lot for the San Francisco and coming in U.S. APEC summit. So thank you again to all of you. And I will pause the recording here.